Today's guest is Harold Roth, esoteric herbalist, artist, author, teacher, and elder in the community. Harold has been one of the pioneers in the poison path. In his book, The Witching Herbs, 13 Essential Plants and Herbs for Your Magical Garden, has become a classic and must-have for anyone looking to work with these plants. And hi, Harold, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. I'm very glad to be here.
First of all, do you consider yourself a witch?
Yes.
And how do you define that? Because I know that's been thrown around a lot with the internet and all that. You're old school from pre-internet, and older.
I think of a witch as somebody who basically works directly with spirits and who basically is in some kind of partnership or equals. Witches, I don't think of witches as commanding spirits like maybe you would if you were working a grimoire. And the other thing is, I think one thing that really strikes me about witches as opposed to other types of magic workers is that witches tend to have more of a connection to nature, and to say maybe do things according to the time of year, what if you're working with plants, what stage they're at in their growth, that sort of thing.
Right. Now, when you say witching herbs, I know we think of datura, henbane, belladonna, mandrake, but you also include poppy, clary sage, yarrow, rue, hyssop, vervain, mugwort, wild tobacco, and actually my favorite, wormwood. So when you say witching herbs, what do you mean by that?
I basically mean that they are plants that people have worked with in some kind of spiritual or occult way. And a number of them actually they contain psychoactive substances, like even some, certainly poppy, but even something like a clary sage, an unexpected euphoric. And also I've found that it was very helpful for working on dreams.
Witches have used these poisonous plants, and I think it was Daniel Schulke termed it the poison path, right? What do you think of that terminology of working with some of these plants?
I think that's legitimate. I think especially if my experience has been to kind of focus on maybe 2 or 3 plants.
Right.
Some people, they want to just do everything. I think that's hard. And also, for me, I find that there's a real, I kind of emphasize nightshades.
Right.
And I notice nowadays people are starting to include aconites in a poison path. And I haven't done that because for me, they're more dangerous because they're less forgiving than the nightshades are generally. Like if you have a cut and you put some nightshade on there, you'll get messed up, but you won't die.
Right.
Most likely you won't die. So you can die, if you started eating them or something, especially belladonna, but with aconites, you can't make mistakes.
Right. That's right. Right.
They won't forgive those mistakes. So for me, I've grown them, just for their beauty.
Right.
And but I haven't worked with them.
Right. I know aconite. I know the Chinese and traditional Chinese medicine. They will treat it and they will cook it in a way that it actually takes out some of the poisons.
Yep.
Like, so if you had to do it all over again, what advice would you give a young witch? Like lessons that you learned that maybe you wish you learned when you started working with them?
Well, a couple of things. I would probably, if I was going to be ingesting, I would start with mugwort.
Right. Yes.
Pretty much non-toxic, yet it's still
mugwort right here. Right. Exactly. So yeah, I'm a big mugwort fan.
Yeah, and it tastes good. It's a nice bitterness. It's
Right.
easy to grow, uh, and it's beautiful, and it has a nice smell, blah, blah, blah.
Hmm.
Plus, it has, a history of use.
Hmm.
But I'd also grow one other plant that could be poisonous. Like for me, I started with datura
You
because
did.
I like the flowers, and I grew them
Right.
for years, just because I like the flowers.
Hmm.
And by doing that, and by growing a plant, you
Hmm.
you are basically a devotee, right? You are
Mm.
grooming it, you're fertilizing it, you're making sacrifices of your time and your money to it.
Right.
Uh, and so that is a good way to get to know the spirit of the plant. And
Right.
it Datura just approached me without me asking. And I
Mm.
think it does that because it's kind of neglected.
Mm.
Uh, and because I think it is, a lot of these plants are very gregarious. They want to interact with humans. So a lot of times you'll hear descriptions of them wanting, you'll find them growing on the edges of paths and vacant lots and things like that. And I think that's an indication of how much they do want to interact with us. Because if they didn't, they'd be growing in the middle of the woods where we couldn't find them.
Right. Well, especially the Torah, you mentioned, working with the spirit of the Torah. And I
Mhm.
remember in your class saying how it's a tricky spirit to work with, right? So
Yeah.
maybe you could talk a little bit about that, working with actually the spirit of that particular plant, in plants in general. Mm.
Well, I found that the tourist spirit, for me, my experience of it was, it basically didn't know its own strength with respect to human beings. And so it was
Mhm.
almost like you hear sometimes about chimpanzees and how they're much stronger than humans, and they can hurt you easily,
Right.
without wanting to, but I do think, my first experience I had with datura was a vision I had when I was taking a nap. And I
Mm.
do find that taking naps is a great way to
Mm.
have dreams that have magical import, because there's
Mhm.
something different about the way you sleep in the daytime. I'm not sure what it is, but at any rate, I saw myself getting out of my body and flying through my house and going out the back where I had daturas growing in pots.
Mm.
And I saw this thing
Mm.
standing there. It's huge, it's gigantic, several stories high, and this kind of dark green, jagged thing. And I knew right away it was datura.
Right.
And it said something very cryptic to me, and I was just absolutely terrified.
Mhm.
Uh, and later I thought, well, that's that plant spirit trying to communicate with me. And it
Wow.
and it, if you think about it, when we try to communicate with other species, most of the times we're not that successful.
Mhm.
And how many centuries was it while we were saying that animals don't have language,
Mhm.
and now we admit they do, but
Mhm.
still it's not like when you just can sit down and have a conversation with your companion animal. I mean, you can talk to them, but it doesn't necessarily mean we'll understand what they say. And I
Mm.
think um that must be especially true for, they aren't animals. Okay, so plants aren't animals, they're completely different genus, and so that's going to make it harder to communicate with them, I think. But I also think that we just have to be more open and more patient and more humble, and
Right.
to be open to what they have to say to us.
Right. Right. Um, of all the plants you work with, what would you say the most powerful spirit of the plant is?
Hmm. Well, I guess it kind of depends what you mean by powerful. I do think that Datura is a very powerful spirit, and it has a reputation in other cultures, like
Right,
Native people of various tribes
mhm,
from North, Central, and South America work with it.
right,
Usually, it has a reputation of being very possessive
mm,
and being perfectly willing to drive their devotee crazy or even
right,
injure them, kill
right,
them. So that's pretty powerful, right?
right,
But
yeah,
on the other hand, you know, most of the time it's not gonna kill you. So I guess if I had to compare it to something like rose,
mm,
which is a very legitimate magical herb.
mm,
You can curse with it, you can make love spells, you can sanctify with it, all kinds of stuff. I mean, you could work with nothing but rose for the rest of your life and have a full kit.
right,
But is how powerful is that? Well, it must be pretty powerful because human beings love growing it.
mm,
So there, we've coddle it, we
mm,
breed it, we treasure it. So I guess it depends on what you think of as powerful.
mm. And how would you use the Torah magically?
It's great for defense.
Hmm.
That's what for me has been big.
Mm,
I've also found that it points things out
mm,
to you,
right,
makes you aware of stuff, and they are are usually on some spiritual level
mm,
rather than simply like saying I don't know, simply defending you. I think that the tourist spirit in my experience has been willing to say, hey, did you notice this, kind of thing,
right,
and not doing it in the most straightforward way. I think there's pretty much nothing straightforward about Datura.
right,
Very I think that's why some people will say about it that it's twisted and it's, stuff like that, negative things. But
mm,
I think really it's more that like I said, it isn't real expert at communicating with human beings, although it obviously really wants to, because there's another plant that grows all over the place. When I first moved into the place I live now, there were literally hundreds of daturas growing all around the back.
wow, that's a message. That's yeah,
Yeah, it was like
wow,
welcome, you know? It was
huh,
very profound.
wow. And that's the type of, I guess, way the plant would be communicating with you, right?
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think they also do it a lot through dream, at least
to
in my
dream, right? Hmm.
and
Um, so in interacting with the plants, I mean, one way is the spirit, but another way, traditionally, witches have done it is through the flying ointments.
right.
So the question is a little controversial. I think it's almost like a forgotten art in a way. Flying ointments, do they work? That's the main question.
I guess it depends on what do you mean by work.
Right.
I think that I guess I find it difficult to believe that flying ointments can take you to meet a group of witches or
Mhm.
to uh run with the mighty dead in the wild
Right.
hunt.
Mhm.
I think that is a lot more on you and
Right.
as a witch, and I haven't actually met or heard of anybody who has done that with anything.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right. Mhm.
But on the other hand, I do feel like plants definitely, or flying lemons, whatever you want to call them, tinctures. I mean, I know people who do tinctures, they do
Right.
ointment,
Mhm.
they do smokes.
Yep.
Smokes are really great because they're the least dangerous way to work
Right.
with it.
Oh, is it really? Smoking? Okay, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah,
Huh.
like you can just put a little bit of whatever herb in a pipe with other a regular kind of soothing herb mix like a mullein or something like that,
Right.
innocuous herb, and you can
Put
just
some.
take one puff and see how it affects you, and then
Mm.
although I still wouldn't do that with acne.
Yeah, can I? You could do it with Datura, maybe mandrake, henbane,
Mhm. Some
belladonna. Right.
people mix them with pot. I
Right.
think that's perfectly okay. Although I think it's important
Mm.
to remember that these guys are not like pot.
Hmm.
You know, they're not innocuous like pot. They're not non-toxic.
Right. Right.
But I
And
do
but
think that they
mhm,
can affect your dreams. And
mhm.
for me, dreams are the primary way for a witch to communicate with the spirit world.
Right. Absolutely. I find it interesting that the eclectics and some of the early pioneers in herbalism in the United States used to regularly use Datura, I think, for asthma,
Yep.
belladonna,
They work
for a
for
number
them.
of things,
Yep.
mandrake. But I think now with more the litigious, FDA
Right.
approved thing, I mean, we can't, I know, and a lot of herbal schools refuse to work with some of these plants.
Yeah.
So,
You
do you
know.
ever see them coming back in vogue as actually medicinal plants?
One of the things I came across probably about maybe well, it was more than 5 years ago.
Mhm,
I came across a group of people online in the UK who
mhm.
are herbalists. And there you have to actually be registered and stuff. You have to can't just say, "Oh, I'm an herbal." You have
Right.
to be
Sure.
vetted by and get a license or something. Anyways,
Mhm.
they were bringing back what they called single
Mm.
herbal tree. So like,
Huh.
and they included datura, and that would
Hmm.
be stramoni,
Oh, right.
belladonna, and
Yep.
I forget the other one now. I guess it was henbane. Yeah, it was. And they were making tinctures.
Wow.
And yeah, and I actually included their formulas in my book
Right.
because, well, you know what? If it's good enough for them,
Right.
you know, they've this. The, the thing about this is a lot of times I find that that people say, well, I want to work with whatever belladonna.
Mm.
What's a safe dose? Well, there isn't it. There's no safe dose. It's not a thing. It's not a thing where you have a dose. It's
Right.
a thing where you have to figure out what can you deal with,
Mm.
what have other people used,
Right.
do you have any traditional knowledge to fall back on it? It-
Mhm.
you know, it's it's going to depend so much on the plant,
Right.
what condition you're in, and all this. It's not standardized. I guess that's the thing that, to me, when I hear dose, I hear standardization.
Right.
Like you take a pill, and uh, it isn't like that. It doesn't. It's so unpredictable.
Mhm.
And I do think that is one reason why they aren't used medicinally very much anymore,
Mm.
because we got into this whole thing of predictability with medicine, even though when you think about it, plenty of pills are totally unpredictable. They give you the
Right.
same pill whether you weigh 100 pounds or 300 pounds, or if you're 16 or you're 66, they give you the same amount. So
Right.
anyways, that's just my little rant.
No, no, no. I'm with you on that. And but so for a young witch who wants to start taking, not saying dose, but they want to start experimenting with some of the nightshades, what could they expect from that? I know there's a bit of dissociation you feel. if ingesting some of these, either smoking or through a witch ointment, which is the
Um,
safest, right?
well, smoking is definitely the safest.
Mm,
What could you expect? These tend to make people feel very heavy,
mm,
dull. Uh, some people have talked about they feel like they are flying. Um, I never had that feeling from then.
mm,
Uh, I think it maybe that depends on, I don't know, maybe it depends on the person, the mood, that kind of thing. But for me, heaviness is important, but also, um, well, I had an experience just the other day when I got up in the middle of the night because I was just awake, and so I said,
mm,
get up and read. And so I'm sitting there reading, and it was just a bland book. There was nothing scary about it or anything like that. And I have a Datura inaxia growing in a pot in my apartment. It planted itself, and I
mm,
was gonna rip it out, but then I said, this thing is here for a reason. It has something to say, so I'm gonna grow it. And
mhm,
it got a number of flowers on it, which
mhm,
give off their scent at night.
mm,
And that scent is psychoactive. Okay.
mm,
So, one way that I've encouraged people, if they want to work with Datura, is to take a plant in their room that's flowering at night
mm, right,
and to allow the scent to affect you. Well, I was
right.
sitting there and there was four flowers on it, and
Mhm,
I could have, I would say, probably about 10 feet away from the plant, sitting there reading, and I could smell it. And after a while, I started hearing these keys that I hang on my door handle clinking. And I
mm,
went over to look at them because I was like, what's going on here? Why are they clinking?
mm.
Now my cat's going, I'm sorry, I don't know how to make her stop. She just
That's okay.
um, she's old and she just
Mm,
gets disoriented. And I went over to look at it, and then they were moving. My keys were
wow,
moving.
wow.
And I was like, holy crap, I gotta, I gotta. So I took my phone and I videoed it because I read that this was one way you could verify whether something you're looking at was a hallucination or really happening.
Huh,
And the video was just keys hanging on the door. And then
wow.
right above the keys hanging on the door were the keys just moving a little bit.
Huh.
So I thought, well, you know what? I went sat down and they stopped moving. But I thought, this is from the scent of the datura. And what does that say to me? That is what it showed me. Okay, now
Mm,
clearly there's an effect of alkaloids, right? Alkaloids in the scent, the perfume of the flower.
mhm,
So there was a real aspect, right?
mhm,
Material. But the hallucination, I think that has meaning separate from the alkaloids, especially
mm,
when you think the fact that Datura has this reputation of really showing people scary things.
right,
And even though this was like I was sitting there thinking, what is that sound?
right.
Uh, and it
Mhm,
was startling, but
mm,
it was horrifying, it was,
right,
and I do think it had spiritual meaning for me.
sure.
Okay. So that I feel like that kind of thing. Okay, now I didn't make a tea, I didn't smoke it, blah blah blah. But
Mm,
just sitting there breathing in its scent,
right,
I think it's a really good way to do it because especially because scent is such a spiritual thing anyway. You know,
sure. Mhm.
the Zohar has that scent is the food of spirits.
Yeah.
So it's kind of neat that these these all have flowers that have psychoactive properties in terms of their scent. It just so happens that datura has really nice smelling flowers.
Right, right. And well, I know Erwin has that website has a number of stories of people who have had some really interesting experiences with Datura and
Yeah.
some of these other plants. Some of them are quite frightening, um, especially people who have ingested it.
Yeah.
Basically becoming delirious for days.
Days.
Yeah, yeah, and it's
I had one customer who called me up. This was years ago. I used to sell ground up henbane, and
mm,
he made tea out of it. And his mom called me because she
mm,
said he'd been hallucinating for 3 days. She said, "What can I do?" I said, "Take it to the emergency room."
right.
You notice, but one thing about these guys is that they're very slow acting,
Yeah.
and they tend to last a long time like
Mm,
that. Not 2 days. I mean, this guy must have drank a lot, you know.
right.
Still, one of the
Right.
reasons why people get in trouble and they end up having these really horrifying experiences or getting hurt or getting taken to the psych center or whatever is because
Mm,
they take some and then it doesn't do anything because it takes a few hours for it to work.
right. And then it
Most of
creeps
the
up on you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
Interesting.
then they do more and more and more. And by the time they
Mhm.
start working, they're like, did way too much.
Right.
So but the nice thing about scent or smoking is that basically it acts right away.
Right.
So
Right.
you don't have to worry about, that. You don't have to worry about
Mhm.
doing too much.
Yeah. Well,
As
I guess
opposed
it's
to,
like taking what do you call it? These marijuana cookies as opposed to smoking it. A lot of
oh
people,
yeah,
or many can't really control it. Let's talk about. Um, so speaking of a scent, I mean, part of your work and what you're really well known is making very unique incenses, planetary incenses, and actually deity incenses as well. I know I've purchased your Hecate incense, which is amazing. How do you come up with some of the formularies? I know some are traditional, but some you also um, have improvised, not improvised on, but actually done your own formularies. Mhm.
I actually have used for a long time, I've used kind of a planetary orientation to
Right.
plants because
Mhm.
it seems to be almost to transcend culture or location. There's a lot of,
Right.
for instance, who think that Mars rules hot
Yeah.
smells,
Mhm.
things like that. So I decided to use that as a kind of organizational thing. So if I was going to do a chthonic, a deity in sense, then
Mm.
I would look at Saturnian plants and
Right.
set. If I was going to do something for defense, then it would be Mars and it would be things with thorns, stuff that was
Mm.
hot smelling, uh,
Mhm.
etc. And I've made use of 777, a book, in
Mm.
terms,
The
it's
correspondences. Yeah.
right.
Mhm.
And I also actually still have a big planetary correspondence chart on the Alchemy Works site that
Right.
I use.
In fact, let's.
And in
I want to.
addition to that,
Uh-huh. I want
I
to show
use,
people that.
oh, okay.
Yeah. Let's.
I
Let me see if I
use,
can do that.
yeah, that's in the front page. There's a link to it.
Yeah. Where we get oils. Let's see. I'm going to. I'm a little new to. Okay, 1 second. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen, and this
Okay.
is right. Can you see it? Let me see. Here we go. Okay.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Alchemy
Yeah.
works.
Press
Right.
on Saturn.
And yeah, so people can go on there. Where is the
Press
planetary?
on Saturn diff.
Okay, 1 second. Let
Press
me
on that, and it'll take you right to it.
1 second. Yeah, it's not working too well. 1 second.
Okay, you can press
Yeah.
on link
Link.
also.
Okay, here we go. Oils. This is your planetary, right? Um. links. Here we go. Yep, the planetary
It should,
correspondence
there
chart.
you go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is great. We have now a lot of the planets, a lot of the plants that you're working with are Saturnian.
yeah.
Here we go. Yeah, and this is aconite. You have all the Saturn plants, black hellebore. Um, so do you want to talk a little bit about Saturn? I know it's a lot of people have negative connotations. Of course, in our world of abundance, Saturn means, you know, getting rid of things. But in this cult world, it's actually a very positive planet, right?
I think so, and
Yeah,
especially for witchcraft,
right,
because witches, don't just do healing or blessing; we also do
right,
cursing, and
right.
I think and especially also working with the dead.
Mhm,
Uh, that is something very Saturnian.
mhm.
Because Saturn is usually associated with Hades as the god of the underworld.
Right,
And we, I think that from my experience has been that Saturnian energy is very good for protection, but
right,
also for just getting yourself squared away. So
right,
when we think of Saturn as being limiting, for
right,
instance, that also means defining your boundaries, uh,
right.
definition, being aware of borders, stuff like that.
Mhm,
So it can be really good for helping you organize or
right.
figuring out where you end in the world begin, the rest of the
Yeah,
world begins. And
absolutely.
then
Yeah.
plus I it just so happens that I like a lot of plants that
Mm,
have Saturnian energy, and I just go with
sure.
that.
I had a teacher once, actually, Goswami Kriyananda, who used to joke, no one likes Saturn, but if it weren't for Saturn, all our buildings would fall apart, right? And and actually, it also harkens back. We spoke of this before, the age of Saturn, because a lot of the great monotheistic religions, Islam, Judaism, Saturn plays a very prominent role. I know in Sufism, Saturn is the
Especially,
highest planet. Mhm.
especially in Greek mythology, I mean that
Right,
they have this idea that there was a golden age before the present when
right,
that we call the Saturn, it's like where Saturnalia and stuff comes from.
right.
And that I think that was the Romans though, but the
Mm,
idea that in the past Saturn ruled, and we can think of it, if you think about stuff that's underground, it's also about precious metals that are
right,
hidden under the ground,
mm,
seeds, you know. So
right.
Saturn has a lot of good stuff about it too.
Right. That's true. And I know there's a lot of theories that one time the Earth, Saturn was the most prominent planet. I mean, that's one of the theories. That when you looked up at the sky, it was bigger than the moon.
Uh,
So, and I've seen that on a number of books. It's almost like a primordial uh, energy. Going back to really the beginnings of the Earth.
uh-huh.
So, but I just find it really interesting. So I also I like that Saturnian energy myself. Everyone loves Venus, and of course, Venus can be dangerous. It can really distract you. And in Jupiter, definitely not a good planet if you have cancer or a tumor. Because you want things to right, and and I think our culture in general is too Jupiterian. I mean, everything's so easy. We have too much abundance. So
Yeah.
that's yeah. So so these plants really are teachers. I agree. The
Yeah.
um, now um, as far as your next book, it's exciting that you're working on a book called The Sword of Moses,
Uh-huh.
right? So and you also teach a Kabbalah class as well.
Yes.
Uh, so do you want to talk? So you've been working with this grimoire, you said for a number of years. The Sword of Moses.
Yeah, I've been
Um,
working with it for about 2 years when I came across it. And
mhm,
in academic articles about just magic in
Mhm.
Judaism, right?
Right.
And I was especially interested in that time period, which is the first millennium,
Mhm.
and when it's written as anywhere from 500 to 750, they think. And that here's this thing, a magic book
Mhm.
that is pretty, got everything in it that you need.
Right.
And I never even heard of it.
Right.
And so I decided that I wanted to look into it more. And then I talked to Weiser about doing a book about it,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
they said yes. And so I've been working on it for the past couple of years now, and hope to have it done by the end of the month. And it's really a cool, and the thing that for me that's really interesting about it, number one, it's all about adjuring angels. Okay, so that you get angels to work with you, and the other thing though, it's got all kinds of spells in there.
Mhm.
Once you do this ritual that prepares you to use the sword, which is actually a big, huge list of 1,800 divine names.
Wow.
And yeah, and different parts of that list go with each spell.
Mm.
And so you use those divine names, which I think that's one reason why people haven't worked with it. There's a pretty common translation of it by Moses Gaster that you can
Mm.
find all over the web. And it's just like a lot of it is just like a bunch of gobbledygook.
Mm.
Even if you knew Hebrew, it wouldn't make any sense. There's just like a jumble of letters, for 1,800 names
Right.
and no vowels. They're just the
Mm.
consonant.
Mhm.
So I think that has intimidated a lot of people. But one of the things
Right.
I'm doing in the book is explaining how you can use those, how you
Uh-huh.
can say them and use the
Right.
sword.
Sure.
So it's fun for me. I'm
Mm.
enjoying.
And how would this grimoire, how old is it? Is it
It's about, let's see, it's about, well, it's probably between 1,500 and maybe 1,300 years old.
wow. Wow.
And it was written by a Jew in
Mhm.
Palestine
Mm.
in the northern part, uh, right at the start of the Fatimid dynasty, so the beginning of
Oh,
the Muslim.
really?
Yeah,
Yeah,
uh-huh.
interesting. Yeah, that was an
Yeah,
interesting his period of history for Egypt. The
yep,
Fatimids, the
totally.
most beautiful mosques were created in that time period.
I know we're very liberal and stuff, and actually the rule
Exactly.
didn't even penetrate that far. I mean,
Right.
technically they're Palestine, but they didn't
Yeah.
really get out there much, apparently.
Yeah. It was yeah, and it was true. They were interested. They were Shiite too. The only, I believe, Shiite controlled sort of
Oh, I
caliphate.
didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I used to live in Cairo, and
Huh?
the Fatimid cemetery is amazing because it's miles and miles of these mausoleums, and
Wow.
people live in them, and it's the Egyptian government doesn't like to admit that it exists, but it's stunning, and a lot of Sufis, a lot of mysticism there, because all the tombs are there.
Wow,
So a lot of,
neat.
yeah, it's a pretty charged area. But and they were very, very liberal. That's true. Very, very
Yeah.
open, very mystical. They were,
Mhm.
well, I look forward to reading this book. And also, will you be teaching a course on it?
Probably.
Yeah,
I
that's
expect
great.
it to come out maybe next year.
Uh-huh.
Should come out
Right.
next year.
Wonderful. And how does so within your own spirituality, how does your work with plants mesh with that? Are there any particular deities you work with, or do you mainly work with Kabbalah, or what's your
Um, I mainly worked with plant spirits themselves,
I see.
and I do consider Hermes to be my main
Hermes, yeah.
yeah, god. Uh, and I ask him for help periodically,
Right.
and that's pretty much, you know,
Hmm.
it. Now,
Hmm.
one thing about working with the Sword of Moses has opened up my mind to working with angels, which I wouldn't have done before.
Hmm.
Uh,
Right.
because now I feel more like they are manifestations of the divine in themselves,
Right.
and that
Hmm.
can be a much more easier way to interact with the divine than just trying to go directly.
Right.
Yeah, I found Hermes to
Interesting.
be very approachable.
Really. Hmm.
Just like candle and burn some
Hmm.
incense,
Hmm.
uh, and that seems to work. I mean, he listens.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, because I know. Well, Hermes would be a Mercury deity, right? Yeah.
And he also
Mhm.
rules over medicine and
Right.
magic
Hmm.
and writing. So he kind of hits a lot of the he hits a lot of the my things that I'm interested
Hmm. Interesting. Well, we have a question and a comment from Sarah Clark. I'm growing Atropa belladonna for the first time. The other night, I had my first dream about my largest plant. Loved Harold Roth's book. So, Sarah, if you want to come on, you're welcome. Um,
in.
for me, time and patience were all really required. I cold stratified the seeds for, I think, 3 weeks.
Mhm.
So, and it is pretty tricky growing some of these plants, isn't it?
Yeah,
Um,
belladonna for me can be very indecisive about whether it wants to germinate or not.
right,
No, sometimes it'll just be zoom. Most of the time, it'll just really hang back.
right,
And I think part of the reason for that is because it's a wild plant, it's not domesticated.
right,
So wild plants tend to germinate at all different times in a staggered way.
right.
Um, so that makes sense that you'll plant like 100 of them and maybe five come up,
Yeah,
and then
I found
slowly.
that myself. Yeah.
Yeah. I've
How, I
actually
mean,
spraying them with gibberellic acid, and it did make
uh,
them germinate more, but then they were kind of weakened by the
yeah,
use of the and they needed babying to keep going.
I see. You were successful, you mentioned, in growing mandrake, though, right? And that's a very
Oh
difficult
yeah,
plant.
that's like my thing. That's like my
Yeah.
thing. I've
Wow.
got about, I don't know, 30 of them
Mm,
right
wow.
now.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's,
four are the Turkmen mandrakes that we talked about the other night.
yeah.
They're
Hmm.
from Iran. They're the biggest of all the mandrake species.
Hmm.
So that can be, hopefully, I'm hoping that, I mean, that actually got them to flower,
Mm,
which really, like, you usually have to wait several years. Uh,
right.
the soonest
Yeah.
I've ever mandrake to flower is like 3 years, but
Mm,
these are a year and a half and they flower.
wow.
So, yeah.
Are you eventually going to sell them, or what are you going to do? Make
I
medicine
do
from them?
periodically. I sell the
Mhm.
roots,
Wow.
and I was hoping to be able to get to the point where I could germinate enough to sell small plants, but I haven't gotten to that point yet. That's going to take a
Mm,
few more years.
yeah. I've had, I always look, I have that little app on my phone. I go on these long bike rides through Queens, and I'm always looking for some of the plants. I haven't been that successful in finding some of the nightshades, but have you found a lot? I mean, I know you found Datura, but
Black nightshade. I've found
black,
a lot. In
really?
fact, yeah, in fact, there was one growing out of the front steps of the complex where I live, which is huge. It has like
Wow.
7 buildings. It's an old mill,
Huh.
and the front steps
Mhm.
have had this. black nightshade growing out of this cement. Yeah.
Wow. Huh. Interesting. Um, Another plant that you write about that I'm really interested in is wild tobacco. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of people think that tobacco, well, will smoke, but that is extremely poisonous, right? I mean, if you smoked like a cigarette of pure wild tobacco, what would happen? I mean, it would be not a good.
You might,
Yeah, yeah,
because you have to what is the word? I can't think of it. Cure. You have to cure them, which is basically fermenting
yep,
them, and that decreases the nicotine and also makes them way less harsh. And
yeah.
I think it's really important.
Hmm.
Um, so I do talk about that in my book, how to do that, how to cure the leaves.
Right. That's right. Hmm.
And actually, some tribes didn't even cure them. What they did is just left them on the plant through the winter, and then they would harvest the, dried dead leaves.
Right.
Or they just use the flowers
Hmm. Right.
and then rub them in an oil, and then see, I've never done this, so I don't know how this worked, but I know
Right.
that they did this, that they would rub
Hmm.
them in a, and then use that oil to moisten cured tobacco.
Right.
So
Interesting.
that might be one way to do it.
And speaking of your book, I want to show people your book if I could. Here it is. That is your book 13, The Witching Herbs, 13 Essential Plants and Herbs for Magical Gardens. It
Uh-huh.
is really a must-have for anyone witch or mystic or anyone interested in these plants to own. It's really become a classic in herbalism. It's a great book. I can't recommend it enough. Um, that's it. And we have a question from Anthony Russell, who's
Okay.
he actually hosts a show with us with Esoteric NYC called the Zodiac Lounge. I don't know if you
Uh-huh.
remember the movie Bell Book and Candle. It's
Yeah.
yeah. So remember the Zodiac Club?
Was
Yeah,
that where Jack Lemmon would
Jack
play the
Lemmon.
bond?
Right, exactly. So
You know, he
Anthony,
reminded me of Jack Parsons in that.
oh yeah, yeah. That's funny. Yeah, it was a great film. But Anthony owned a for many years. He owned a sort of store and at night a speakeasy called the Zodiac Lounge, where that would happen, and it was a gathering place for witches and interesting people. So he has a question, and yeah, and he has a show every Saturday night called the Zodiac Lounge, where we've recreated that whole sort of hangout. So, question for Harold. Have you found ancient temple incense recipes and have you grown the herbs to replicate them? And I must say, Anthony does these amazing replications of ancient rituals, like particularly Greek, so in Roman. So,
Oh, neat. Yeah,
mm,
uh I did make the Temple of Edfu Kifi.
mm,
I didn't grow, I don't think I grew any of the ingredients. Can't remember. I've also done other versions of Kifi from like there's an Aramaic one, there's one that was from in Dioscorides, the herbalist from,
mm.
I think he's like 300 or something. No, must be later. I think it's maybe like 800 is the year time
Mhm.
period, but I'm not sure. I know he was a physician for the army, but at any rate, so he had a version of, because Kiffy was used medicinally. So I made that. Um, I also looked at old formulas, like I didn't have it on the site, but I made Birds of Cyprus one time, as it's
Mm.
called, and something that Crusaders brought back from the Middle East, on a mixture that they would shape into little birds and then burn them on, charcoal. They were made out of different kinds of resins and oils and stuff. So yeah, I've done that. It's really I love doing that kind of stuff.
Hmm. And what's your best source for some of these ancient formulas?
Really just poking around. I mean,
Mhm.
one place to get ideas is old pharmacy books back when pharmacists actually used to make stuff.
Right,
Uh,
right.
and there are formulas in those for various kinds of, especially to get older ones,
Mhm.
for various kinds of even insects. I mean, they used to
Mhm.
make these things called pastilles where you would put them on something heated, and they
Mhm.
actually used it a lot of times to make a room of a sick person smell better.
Hmm.
Uh, but there's perfume recipes. A lot of perfumery books
Mhm.
have information about combining scents, but then you still need to put that on some kind of solid thing like ground up resin or myrrh or damar or frankincense or whatever you want to use, and then you can really tweak them and make
Mhm.
any kind of scent basically.
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, great. So now, how does someone work with you now? I know you have your website. I'm gonna put your website up, and I know you have
Well,
some classes coming up.
I have classes. I have two classes will be starting again in April. Using the witching herbs is one, and the other one is magic and Kabbalah. Kabbalah. I always say it wrong.
There we go. The classes.
Yeah.
And so we have the Kabbalah Magic course and the witching herbs in their uses. Yeah, and that is a great course. It really is. Um, yeah, and you actually do discuss how to make the witch ointments as well.
Yeah.
Um, which yeah, I've toyed with those as well. I've also gotten Sarah Lawless's witch ointments, which are very well made.
Uh-huh.
Um, do you make witch ointments for sale as well, or?
I never did because it put when I was working for Alchemy, when Alchemy Works was my shop, I did it
Mhm.
because it puts you in a very gray legal area.
Yeah,
And you
right.
could easily lose your ability to take payments. And I know that Sarah Laurelist has experienced that a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
She's had problems with that a lot, especially
Hmm.
if people have them kind of axe to grind and then they,
Right.
report you to the powers that be, etc. So, uh, and also I knew that if PayPal found out, they would just kick me off.
Yeah.
And
Right.
and I'd been uh, taking PayPal for like 20 years. I didn't
Right.
want to lose the plus.
Right.
I did make some things, and then I would get people like I remember one time this guy notified me because I did make a flying oil,
Mm.
and it didn't have anything toxic in it.
Right.
But he wrote to me and complained because he said he drank the whole bottle and nothing happened.
Oh. Oh my God. Well, thank God you didn't have
So
anything poisoned. That's the problem with, that is a problem with the poisonous plants, even with herbalism. I mean, because people are, I don't want to say stupid, but they don't really pay attention sometimes, you know,
yeah,
of drinking the oil and they want to get high. That's the problem. And, it's not really, I mean, there are a lot of people are doing it for spiritual reasons, but some just really want to get high, and that's when you end up on the Airwand website,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
on the
because
news.
yeah,
um,
it's really
yeah,
that was an issue, and I think it still is. When I look around at what people are selling now,
right.
stuff with aconite in it,
Hmm. No, no, no.
uh,
Yeah,
I just feel like you're just asking for trouble, and
right.
I don't. I also feel very strongly you do not need to ingest anything to be a witch.
Right.
You don't have to ingest anything to have profound spiritual experiences and connection with plants.
Absolutely.
For me, the main way to connect to plant spirits is to grow them, to fertilize them, to
Right.
care for them, to groom them,
Yeah.
to like kiss them.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I mean, I've had people who have told me, "Oh, wow, if you aren't, making a, whatever drink out of these leaves, then you're just full of crap." But I think that uh,
Right.
I know that my experiences with these plants are real.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And
So, and
I know a
I'll
lot
get
of, yeah. I know a lot of times I'll go on my bike and I will take some of the seeds, and based on intuition and, dreams, I'll go out and I'll plant them like as a
that.
service to the plant, and
Yes,
I've developed a very strong connection, well, particularly with mugwort. Mugwort, seems to be a recurring plant. Um, and I know in Queens, it's harvested because the Chinese diaspora there really values that
yeah,
plant because it's used. But there are other plants as well, and I think you're right. It's honoring them, letting them spread, and actually planting them so they can grow different
yeah.
areas.
I
I think
do think that's a real serious way of honoring them. And, it's
right,
basically helping them spread their children all over the place in a way they could not do themselves.
right, exactly, and yeah, and but I know some of these big companies like PayPal, even with CBD now,
So,
it's
yeah.
really a gray area. It's a shame because it's a medicinal
Well,
plant, and
it seems like they're a little more, uh, what's the word? Well, they don't care. They
okay,
don't care more,
yeah,
because I've noticed that people are openly advertising stuff as flying ointments with poison in them, and they're not. Uh, well, they're certainly not getting in trouble with with who was it?
FDA
Yeah, it was the
or
FDA, and
DEA,
they used the harass. That's who
DEA,
DEA,
yeah,
because
yeah, right,
um, if you make something that has psychoactive effects and you say
right,
so, and you
right,
sell it, you're considered to be manufacturing a scheduled substance, even though they aren't scheduled, you know,
right,
they aren't.
mm.
But if you're saying, oh, this will make you fly to, Venusberg, um,
right, right,
you're selling something that's, uh, you could go to prison for. So
yeah,
I
hmm,
think that, so there's that, plus then there's the issue of losing your payment processor. I mean, I had
yeah,
this payment process. I used to take credit cards, and I had separate uh, people who would process the credit cards, not PayPal. And
mm.
one weekend, all of a sudden, I didn't have the ability to take cards anymore, and I was like, "What the heck
Wow,
happened?" Well, it was because I was selling Datura seeds.
wow,
So they can really
that's
get
yeah,
butt about something, and then, so if people want to know why, people aren't selling these things, well, that's one
yeah,
reason why.
right, right,
Lose their livelihood because of that. I don't know. But other people are more daring.
yeah, well,
They're more
yeah.
daring about that. They're willing to risk
Mm.
that. That's up to them.
Yeah, and a lot of the flying ointments I've seen around, some of them don't contain any dangerous materials. Maybe calamus at the most.
Small amount.
Yeah. So, and I know now some of the big plants are, some of the Amazonian plants like Calea zakatichi and these type of things were a little bit safer maybe, or um, but
Pardon?
they're not really. they're not really, traditionally witching plants,
Yeah, they might
so,
be in their native cultures, like
yeah.
tobacco, wild tobacco sure is.
Mm,
Um, but it doesn't seem like, I don't know. I don't really know much about the entheogens. I kind of
right,
stayed away from them. I started out with selling some of them, but
right.
I found that many of the customers were so annoying.
How's that? That's
Well, they would, say I was selling Banisteriopsis
right.
pieces,
Okay.
right? Sell, and um, they would want to know how much did they have to use to get high,
Right,
and if they
right,
didn't get high, if they did whatever they did,
right,
then they wanted to be abusive about it, or they treated me like I was a drug dealer,
right,
or
right.
they used fraud a lot. You know,
Hmm. Yeah,
it was just too much of a pain in the butt.
yeah.
So I got rid of
I hear you.
those things like within a couple of years of opening my shop, and I never sold them again. I
Right.
mean, I know there are people who are totally legit who
Hmm.
sell them, and people who are totally legit who use them.
Right. Hmm.
They attracted to my shop.
I know. I hear you. That's interesting. But no, just one more thing, and we're coming close to the end of the hour. But your Hecate incense was really fascinating the way you put it together. You had saffron in it. You also had, but I recall you also had some. I think was it belladonna. You did have one of the nightshades in it because I know you couldn't touch with your hand. Um,
Yeah, I can't think of it off the top of my head. I know that I had myrrh.
all right,
'Cause, yeah, that's associated with the dead, and
right,
I also had uh, a Popinax, which is a type of myrrh. It's like the
right.
same
Hmm.
as, and saffron.
Mm,
Uh, I might have put I might have put some aconite in there because I used the traditional Chinese medicine preparation for
right,
aconite, which removed pretty much all of the alkaloids.
right. Hmm.
I think it's boiling in salt water for a couple of days or something
Right.
like that.
Hmm.
And that way you could have it for magical reasons and it wouldn't be
Wouldn't be
dangerous.
dangerous, right? Hmm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Well, like I say, a big fan of your work, and I'm glad we were able to
Thank
talk.
you so much for having me.
And yeah, it's just I love your spiritual approach to the plants. I mean, it's really affected the way I work with them. And honor them, and yeah, and be of service, really, really to
I
this
really
these
love that you
intelligences.
go around and plant mugwort. I think that's really
Yeah.
wonderful.
So it's yeah, it's a process, as you know. So, but does anyone have any questions? We have if not, then and I want to share your website once again. Here we go. And you have the classes coming up in April, and
Yep.
that is it's haroldroth.com.
Mhm.
Here we go. We get the classes, and we have the Kabbalah Magic, which I did not take, and that looks fascinating.
That one's really developed
Yeah.
well. I mean,
Mm,
I've learned so much from teaching that, and
mm,
I know that my people must have too,
yeah.
maybe more than they ever wanted to know.
Right. And you're also an artist too, which is
Yeah,
great. I mean, is your art inspired um by your work with the plants? So,
a lot of it is, and
yeah,
also with just trying to connect to the spirit world, to the
that's
visual.
beautiful. The
Um,
dreams in the witch house. I love that.
yeah,
That's beautiful.
yeah. I
Yeah.
I
Base.
traded the Torah for Hezekiah and
Yeah.
Jenkin in the story, The Dreams in
Mm,
the Witch House. No,
beautiful.
my Hecate incense is not a historical formulation.
Mhm.
Anthony
This
is.
is oh, it's based on a story by H.P. Lovecraft. Great. Um,
Yeah,
Yeah, question for Harold. Yeah, have you found the answer? Okay, let me see. Yep, historical. But yeah, but it really is based on ancient wisdom. I mean, with the planetary and
Some
yeah,
things that were traditionally associated with her, like saffron.
mm, right,
She's got the
right,
saffron club. One
beautiful.
of what's that word? It's not honorific. It's like one of the phrases that are associated with her in Greek prayers.
Right, that's sort of her like litany of names. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Saffron Queen, beautiful. And Anthony says, "Thank you. Intrigued by your process in constructing yours." Yeah, great. Well, Harold, really, I appreciate you taking your time out. We look forward to your book and
Thank you.
also taking future classes with you. And yeah,
Thank you for having me. They're very enjoyable.
absolutely. We'll chat soon. Okay. Good
Okay,
night,
good
everyone. Thank you.
night.
Take care. Bye bye.